I know more about the Port Arthur massacre than is socially acceptable.
What's up, Dazzlers? Today on Razzle Recommends, we're going to be reviewing this Nitram charcoal pencil. But before we get into my content, of which no one is making me do, make sure that you like the video, subscribe, leave a comment, unlike the video, leave another comment, subscribe again, recommend this video to someone, subscribe to Audible, build a website with Squarespace, shave your privates with Manscaped, and fall deeper into a parasocial relationship with a person that you will never ever meet. Now that you have engaged with my content, let's look at the real point of this video. These charcoal pens are fun for the whole family. Let's open them up. Whoops, I accidentally ripped it. Leave a comment if you didn't rip it. Ah, isn't that wonderful? You see the packaging? It says Nitram. What an original name. Ah, this is a wonderful pen. See, it's beautiful on my very white skin. But if you ever wanted to sharpen these charcoal pencils, you have to make sure that you buy the Nitram sharpening block. And I happen to have one of those right here in this package. Let's open it up. Here we... What the fuck is this?
For those who aren't familiar with me or my channel, I'm Angus, and I made an 11-hour series debunking the conspiracy theories that surround the massacre. I've lived in Tasmania for my entire life, and I figured that I was in a unique position to debunk them myself. I went to the State Library to read official reports, and I guess you could say that I'm the world's foremost expert on the movement, mainly because no one else cares. Now, while I was initially working on this series, Nitram was announced and released. This was very interesting to me because it inspired the public to start thinking about the Port Arthur massacre more critically, and I managed to have a lot of interesting conversations with people of my generation and people who are older. You know, because people avoid talking about the massacre down here. But Nitram was a very hot topic. There was public outrage, and much ink was spilled over whether or not the film should be allowed to turn a profit in Tasmania. I've also gained a bit of a reputation at my university for knowing lots about it. All of the teachers refer to me as Port Arthur boy, and whenever I bring up my series to someone new, the first question I always get is, what did you think of Nitram? To which I usually reply that I loved it. Which is true, but my feelings are more complicated than that. I recently wrote an essay for university about it, got a distinction. It was too conversational, which I get a lot at uni. When I was initially writing it, the word limit was about 2,500 words, and I just kept writing and writing, and I remembered new things, and I kept writing and writing, and the whole project just got significantly bigger than I wanted it to be, so I had to rewrite it again, and I basically handed in an abridged version of what I'm about to speak about. So this essay is essentially something that's been written like 3 times before, and it's the best parts of all of those amalgamated things. Something I purposefully chose to do in my Port Arthur series was not to speak frivolously about the spree shooter that killed 35 people. In that series I referred to him as Blondie, but now that the series is over, I'm going to use this video to discuss the cocktail of contradictions that made Nitram such a mesmerizing experience. For those of you who are less familiar with the massacre, I'm going to speak about how the film works, and I hope to give you some of the context behind the action scene in the film. This is less of a review and more of an analysis. I wanted to discuss some elements that I haven't seen anyone else talk about, using my own unique perspective and my own wealth of knowledge. Without further ado, Chapter 1. Snowtown and Structure. Nitram caused tremendous controversy across Australia, as it aims to dramatise the Port Arthur massacre, a taboo event that still reverberates across contemporary politics today. The film is an intimate drama and a character portrait, and it was directed by Justin Kurzel.
It became very obvious very quickly that it was an anti-gun film, but that it was incredibly powerful in the way in which it played out.
Kurzel previously dramatised the Snowtown serial killings, and he also did a fantasised take on the legend of Ned Kelly. Snowtown is a haunting and miserable experience about sexual assault and murder. It is hard to watch, but it has this intimate quality, an emotional tenderness that is difficult to describe. It fucked me up. It was way too close to home. Kurzel has lived in Tasmania for the past decade, and he is intimately aware of how much pain the massacre causes here, even nearly 27 years later.
And the last thing I want to do is bring trauma to this place that I absolutely adore and love, but there was something in the script that started a conversation and a discussion about this event that I know is very hard to have here.
His previous films explore the dark crevices of toxic masculinity and how men just don't deal with their trauma. Macbeth, the Kelly Gang, Assassin's Creed, of course. So the dramatisation of the massacre should come as no surprise. It does come as a shock, though, that the film is restrained and tasteful, focusing less on the sensational violence and more on evoking empathy with the most hated man in Australia. Critically, empathy, but not sympathy. Because if we can understand Nitram, then we can recognise what went wrong with him, and then we can begin to understand the core of his disaffected nihilism. Let's lay some groundwork. In analysing this film, we must look at it from two different perspectives: national and international. In Australia, everyone knows how the film will end. It's kind of like Titanic. Everyone comes to the theatre to leer at a boat sinking. But internationally, it's just another drama that happens to have a shocking ending.
Now, I didn't know anything about the film before I started watching it. I just knew the director's name, and I knew Caleb Landry Jones and other members of the cast. And I thought that what was very powerful is to confront somebody with a picture of somebody who clearly, absolutely clearly, should not have access to guns, and then watch them have access to guns in a scene that is really kind of underplayed and low-key.
And even though I am a local, I can sympathise with an international audience, because I myself wasn't alive during the massacre. I wouldn't be born for another 2 years. My generation don't really have visceral feelings towards the massacre because it wasn't traumatising for us. At the same time, we can almost look at the event more objectively. I find that it's older people who are the angriest at Nitram because they still bore the mental scars of Port Arthur. I know that my dad absolutely refused to see it. So generationally, we can engage with the history without unnecessary affect getting in our way. The film starts with historic footage and a disclaimer that this is based on true events, but it doesn't indicate where the story will go. On the face of it, the story is absurd. An otherwise random loner inherits $1 million and then he kills a few dozen people. There's a reason why the conspiracy theories, exist, because it is just an insane story. But fact is often stranger than fiction, and Port Arthur happened for a multitude of different coincidences. Nitram is both a film and a character within the film, so going forward I'm going to use the word Nitram to describe both the text and the character's actions. Nitram did this and Nitram did that. But I will be discussing and contrasting this with the actions of the real Martin Bryant. I'm dropping the PC pretext because this is already a very confusing dichotomy. I'm distinguishing between the character and the man in prison. Further, the film refers to the mother and father, Carleen and Maurice, respectively as the mother and the father. So to avoid confusion, I will just default to calling them Carleen and Maurice when appropriate. I will make all of these distinctions clear as possible, but I just had to say all of this up front, because there are actions that Nitram does in the film that Bryant never did, and I don't want any bad faith conspiracy theorists being dumber than normal in the comments. Because Nitram the film is itself an act of interpretation. It is fiction, even if said fiction is based on true history. The film begins as a slice-of-life picture that explores mid-90s suburban Australia, and Nitram himself starts out as an almost comedic character, stumbling through relationships and social interactions.
Do you think you'll be playing with firecrackers anymore?
Yes.
Now, Doug, get out!
We are his sisters and his cousins and his aunts.
In the beginning, you feel a bit sorry for him, But as the film shifts, grief begins to take hold, and ultimately, he falls into the depths of depravity. There are several immoral actions that take place in Nitram, as our main character, true to life, has a penchant for mischief. There is a telling scene that gains new meaning upon subsequent rewatches. Caleb Landry Jones plays Nitram, a fictionalized version of Martin Bryant. He's playing with fireworks outside of a primary school. He jumps over the crackers to the children's delight. He even starts handing them out to the children as a teacher comes along to scold him. Coincidentally, his father, Maurice, played by Anthony LaPaglia, drives by and collects him. The teacher, a man who went to school with Nitram, cusses out Maurice for allowing his son to behave in such a manner around kids.
Get in the car. I'm really fucking sorry.
Right, he just needs something else to do, all right? You know, he can't just be hanging around.
I know. I promise it won't happen again.
The implication of all of this is that Nitram is a social failure. His peers are so far beyond his mental capabilities. But much later in the film, after two of our main characters have passed away, Nitram watches the morning news on the 13th of March 1996. He sees that a man named Thomas Hamilton has entered the Scottish Dunblane Primary School with 2 handguns, and he has killed nearly 16 children. Hamilton was suspected of being a pedophile, and experts say that the shooting was in part motivated by getting some kind of psychosexual revenge against the children for ruining his reputation.
In July 1973, he became a scout leader, but was thrown out in March 74 for his behaviour with young boys at a camp. He started more boys' clubs, but many parents withdrew their children, unhappy at the way they were treated. He was a keen photographer and had many photographs of children in his house. A month ago, he was refused membership of a local gun club.
Nitram watches this in the same way that he might watch a soap opera. No emotion comes across his face, but he is intrigued.
A misfit, a loner, an oddball, a weirdo. Just some of the descriptions now emerging. He was mistrusted for his obsession with young boys and with guns.
Hamilton's corpse is growing colder, but Nitram identifies these words. He recalls not being allowed to play with kids and then being called a weirdo. He is forbidden by the school authority from interfering with these kids. Crucially misunderstanding this innuendo, he takes Hamilton's lead and he becomes further compelled, or even inspired, to plan out the Port Arthur massacre. Chapter 2. Martin Bryant. Caleb Landry Jones won the Best Actor award at 2021 Cannes for his portrayal.
Caleb Landry Jones for Nitram for Justin Kurzel.
I think I'm gonna throw up. I'm sorry.
Jones is an interesting man in his own right. He grew up in Texas, and not only is he an actor, but he also makes music. Lynchian, bizarro music. I'm into it. He is known primarily for his supporting roles in Get Out, X-Men First Class, and Free Billboards Outside Missouri. He's won many awards, but he isn't exactly the most dynamic actor. He's always typecast as a used car salesman, a slimy guy.
God, her husband, another fucking
that
prick
slimy
in Twin Peaks.
guy. He was in like Get Out. I feel like he's always that. He's an Antiviral.
Okay.
The Brandon Cronenberg movie.
Okay.
He's always that kind of guy.
He plays it well.
He's perfect in this.
Oof.
This typecast leads to loads of memorable supporting roles, but Nitram was of course going to be a demanding and tricky performance to pull off.
I remember when reading it, I was just a bit skeptical about this idea of trying to force empathy or something. I didn't want that. And then when I met Justin, it was clear to me that we weren't going to be doing that, and that we were going to make a vessel live and breathe, and we were going to find out what that was together.
One should always be skeptical when a neurotypical actor attempts to play a character that is this mentally disturbed, because it often comes across as comical. Consider John Travolta in 2019's The Fanatic.
I can't talk too long. I gotta poo.
Travolta tries to emulate an autistic person as an obsessive fan of a movie star.
She is not my BBF. She is not.
And it just comes across as cringeworthy and embarrassing.
We're not awful, terrible people. We don't laugh at people like that.
No.
It's the fact that that actor is trying to pull it off.
Yes.
And it's a very hard thing to pull off without it coming off as as like I want an award, or I'm making this bold choice as an actor. I'm taking on this challenge.
Also consider Sia's, what is that movie called? Music. I have not thought about that movie in like a year and a half. Actors are sometimes motivated by their egos to take challenging roles, and most of the time they overdo it. The performance of Nitram is genuinely scary. It's never explicitly stated, but Martin Bryant in real life was diagnosed as having Asperger's disorder and ADHD, two conditions that make it very difficult for him to interact with other people. And as someone who has both of these disorders, it's terrifying to see an actor emulate the peculiarities of body language and the slurs of speech that are so common with us. There are small moments, like when Nitram is gifted a pair of shorts by his dad, and he models himself as Superman. I have seen so many friends make that exact expression. He performs to make others laugh at him so that he's in on the joke. Nitram's not solely identified by his mental illnesses though. He's a waste man, unable to get a job, and he has nothing to do. He wears shirts with massive holes in the armpits. No one has any expectations for him, so he doesn't care about what he wears. As the film goes on, and Nitram becomes more narcissistic, he dresses in ugly suits and ties. Despite these dramatically different outfit choices, they themselves track onto Nitram's descent into vindictive spite. It's worthwhile taking a look at some of the source material, as it were, to try and understand what the true history was all about. In my opinion, what made Martin Bryant such a memorable mass killer was that he looked like a normal enough young man. He was conventionally handsome, tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, and because he looked like a normal enough guy, people would initially treat him as normal. But as certain interactions would go along, people began to realize that he was dim, that there only seemed to be a shadow of a personality within his psyche. Bryant was intelligent enough to follow basic social scripts. He could fluently interact with shop clerks, for instance. But once the conversation went off script, he was unable to think of what to say next. So he would just mumble and repeat himself and go on an unrelated or disrupted tangent. This is common for autistic people, and Caleb nails it. The stutters and the mumbles have this recognizable rhythm to me, and it's important to note that Caleb, again, is originally from Texas. He does a bloody bonzer accent. One of the best ones I've ever seen an American do.
First of all, his Australian accent is absolutely flawless. I've never heard one that good. Very hard for American actors to do Australian, and his is just flawless because he completely immersed himself in this character.
Reports are that he watched reruns of Australian soap operas to get the accent right. The tragic part of Nitram as a character is that despite being slow, he is just smart enough to recognize when people don't like him, and that makes him very angry and resentful.
I'm the one no one listens to. I'm the retard.
Oh, don't say that.
You and Dad would always argue about it, wouldn't you?
Yeah, we do.
Slow means the same thing, Mum. You're no different than all them kids who call me Nitram at school.
This begins a vicious cycle that eventually circles down the drain. There are several events that happened to the real-life Martin Bryant that do not occur in Nitram. The film makes no mention of Lindy Bryant, his little sister, nor does it discuss Helen Harvey's mother. When Bryant first met Helen, she lived with her mother. This very elderly woman suffered from an array of ailments, and she was severely neglected, with bones that had been broken and not fixed for years. She died shortly after Martin moved himself in. It was unrelated. These changes are anachronistic, and they don't really give us the full picture of some of the characters. For example, Martin was quite resentful of his younger sister because she had a normal social life. There are three main reasons as to why these details were omitted from the film. Firstly, Kurzel and writer Sean Grant believed that it was responsible to tell the story of the film with as few characters as possible. If they could omit someone and have the story still be intact, they would, as to not cause anyone any unnecessary pain. This is why Nitram doesn't have any girlfriends in the film, when, in the lead up to the massacre, he had a string of breakups. Secondly, although the stories of Martin Bryant's girlfriends are interesting and bizarre, they had to be cut for time. The story could be 10 hours long because it is so detailed and strange, but it wouldn't be as good. because stories with less characters are easier to consume. The film is a tight hour and 52 minutes, with layered characters who have rich interconnected relationships. To stuff the story full of trivia would blunt the ultimate message of the film. Finally, it's worth keeping in mind that Nitram was filmed at the height of the pandemic. It was shot in a studio in Melbourne. That's why there are so few characters, and I do think this is for the best, because each member of our main cast gives us strong performances. I do think that some of the minor roles, doctors, tenants, clerks, are a little dry and clinical. It makes sense for the doctor in the very beginning of the movie. He sees his patients as being on a conveyor belt, itself a criticism of Australian healthcare. This is used as a diagnostic point as to why the massacre happened. The characters are dull because Nitram himself is dull, and while most of them do feel like normal people, I think it would have been nice to see some more vibrant performances in there somewhere. Another criticism I have of the film is that some of the exterior shots don't look like Tasmania, they just look like suburban Melbourne. There is a relatively infamous point of trivia in which you see a tram car drive by Nitram and Carleen, even though there weren't any trams in Tassie in the 90s. Which, it's understandable, it doesn't detract from the film. However, certain locations, like the Bryant household for instance, look eerily similar to Lena Valley, the place where they lived. Like this shot right here, I genuinely did a double take in the theatre because it looks almost exactly like a street that I used to live in when I was in Lena Valley. While some of the exteriors leave a little bit to be desired, the interior sets look great, they feel lived in and run down. The film isn't explicitly grungy or grimy, but some of the locations look gross. I was born in 1998, so I cannot attest to how Tasmania looked in 1996. But all of the accents felt familiar, and the guns felt completely alien. We'll discuss that much later into this episode. It's noteworthy to me that the film jumps around a lot on its timeline. The events would have taken place over the course of about 4 years, from about 1991 to 96. We don't get much sense of time passing in the film. It kind of feels like the movie takes place over a couple of weeks. The most anachronistic example of timeline consolidation is when Nitram and Helen get into a car crash. Helen dies, and Nitram wakes up in a hospital room. The very next scene, Nitram is out clubbing. He has cuts all over his face, as if the crash happened to him 2 days ago. In reality, Martin was in hospital for 6 months in a neck brace. This was cut for time because the purpose of Helen's death in the narrative is to convey certain things about Nitram. The consolidation is to make the narrative stronger, and it makes sense. The film doesn't have to be perfectly accurate because it itself is an act of interpretation. Chapter 3, Helen and Hearth. The relationship between Nitram and Helen is pivotal to the rest of the narrative. In fact, British film critic Mark Kermode likened their relationship to the 1971 film Harold and Maude.
Do you sing and dance?
No.
No. I thought not.
Which leads us to some very fruitful comparisons. Both films prominently feature an older woman and a younger man learning from each other. They serve as an odd couple dynamic that is peculiar and entertaining. The mentor's experience invigorates the youth's naive hopelessness. She gives him a purpose in life. But where Harold and Maude engage in glorious hijinks in their nihilism, Nitram and Helen wallow in their own misery. Helen is an heiress well past her prime. In real life, she was the heiress to the Tattersall gambling fortune, a name that lingers over Australian culture. Ever heard of Tats Lotto? That's the same family. Helen represents a kind of decaying opulence in the narrative. The aristocracy, once so proud and opulent, are now sad and boring. The world has passed her by, and you get such a sense of history from Essie Davis's performance. She's a terrific actress, but her familiarity with Tasmania, in being a local, really sells the part. Davis is married to Kurzel in real life, and she is so intimate in this movie. She's empathetic, assertive, and truly kind. Helen is a fascinating character because, despite her sadness, she's such a force for good in Nitram's life.
Preferring the company of animals to humans, and she's a deeply shy person who accepts the help of this stranger in cleaning up her yard.
She encourages him to be himself, she dissuades him from playing with firearms, and she keeps him busy. Her interest in Nitram is not entirely altruistic though. She has no immediate family, and she seems to fill the void with animals and expensive things. It is suggested that she views Nitram like one of her dogs. He doesn't talk back very much, he follows her wherever she goes, and he provides her with companionship. Essentially, he's a stray that she took in. And this is not to say that the performances are artificial or manipulative. Jones and Davis have excellent chemistry together. They become codependent on one another, and they are truly happier together than apart. In the film, we see that Helen understands how Nitram works. She understands how he talks, and she sees the good in him. Early in the film, Nitram moves out of his parents' house, and some months later, on his birthday, they all meet in the Broad Arrow Cafe. The convict settlement of Port Arthur is referred to with innuendo. This is done because the film crew weren't allowed to film in Tasmania, both because of the pandemic and due to the potential of public outcry. As an audience, we get the gist of what the location is. If we look at the film from an international perspective, the audience doesn't know that the Port Arthur massacre is going to happen. It is necessary in the narrative, then, for the settlement to be set up as an important location. If Port Arthur just showed up at the end without any prior scenes taking place there, it would just feel jarring and the ending would ultimately feel anemic. So the writer, Sean Grant, had to make the only scene taking place there count. And in my opinion, they nailed it! The inter-character drama is really tense.
I got him something else too.
More gold?
Something sweet I know he'll like.
Oh, goodness, you know a lot about my son.
Can you live with someone?
But I suppose there were just, we added more layers of motivation for everybody, rather than it just being driven by what could easily be seen as the hag mother, you know? So there are dynamics between the people. So there's power plays that go on. There are allegiances that form that can exclude the third party.
We see the Bryants interrogating Helen. They're trying to figure out what she wants from their son. It's the best scene in the film, and I hung on every single word. It doesn't feel like they're setting up the massacre for the end. Instead, this is an organic moment of character development. Helen speaks about how she thinks Nitram is considerate. Carleen gives a monologue, which ended up in the trailer, about when he was a boy. And we learn why she resents her son so much. It's emotionally disquieting because there's just so much that's left unsaid. This has likely happened more than once. She almost felt relieved that he went missing. She was in so much pain. And yet, he not only didn't care, but he also chose to stay ignorant of that pain. Nonetheless, Helen continues to love Nitram in her own way. The film frames Helen and Nitram's relationship as an intimate friendship, not an explicitly sexual one. This is a point of speculation in the true crime community, because only Martin Bryant knows what took place in their relationship. Ultimately, it doesn't matter if they were platonic or not, and the film frames them as friends foremost. Helen teaches Nitram Chopsticks, a simple piano melody that anyone can play.
You did it. Now you can tell people you can play the piano.
She teaches him this so that Nitram can show to others and prove to himself that he can be seen as talented. This is perhaps the first time in his life that anyone has bothered to show him anything of this nature. It's a small tender moment that gains a haunting quality after Helen dies. He plays it to recapture that feeling that she gave him, and it's hollow. In real life, locals suspected that, before the massacre, Bryant purposefully killed Helen Harvey to get her fortune, and it only became a stronger urban legend after the massacre. The reality is that Helen and Martin got along famously. Martin's parents reported that when they were teaching him how to drive, he would pull the wheel on them, nearly sending the car into oncoming traffic. Maurice, being a strong man, was often able to overpower him, but Helen, being a decrepit old lady, could not. The wheel-pulling scene set up and paid off is not framed as a death wish or as Nitram's attempt to acquire Helen's vast estate, but instead as a matter of play. Like with the superhero posturing, Nitram is performing. In being annoying, he's entertaining himself. He doesn't even consider the fact that he might kill someone. The car crash kills Helen immediately, and one of the most shocking and visceral scenes of the film is when Nitram wakes up in hospital. Maurice tells him that the police want to speak to him about the accident, so he tells Maurice that he was asleep. Carleen immediately sees through this, but keeps it to herself, and as a slow build, Nitram realizes that he's killed the only friend he has in the world, a complete accident of his own making. He is overcome by his grief. His face turns purple and he screams in emotional agony. It hurts to watch because the pain is so agonizingly raw. The film leaves it ambiguous as to whether Nitram is performing his emotions here, exaggerating his pain to avoid jail time. Bryant was often characterized as being a psychopath and a sadist in the media, to make him less human, less like the average Australian man he was. But this scene shows us nothing of the sort. He feels a genuine, deep, and agonizing pain that he cannot express verbally, so he just screams. He cared deeply for this person that he accidentally killed, so he desperately searches for something else to blame. Chapter 4, Morose, Maurice, and Masculinity. I gotta make jokes for myself. Another immoral event that sets Nitram down his eventual path of destruction was the suicide of Maurice Bryant. Like with the death of Helen, locals theorized that Maurice was killed by Bryant so that he could get his life insurance. This is simply slanderous. Maurice, aside from Helen, was Martin's best friend. They loved each other like a father and son do. Nitram is an armful, but Maurice does his best to help him. In real life, they started lawn mowing businesses together. They cleaned up Helen Harvey's mansion, and Maurice tried his hardest to keep his son occupied with farm chores. This was difficult to do because of his temper. On their farm properties, locals reported explosive tantrums that led to threats of violence.
When I first met him, we had a bit of an altercation, and he followed me home, and then he threatened he'd shoot me.
Almost 5 years ago, Martin Bryant was reported to police for threatening to shoot 3 people, including a small child. Incredibly, the police did nothing.
True to life, Maurice wants to buy the Seascape Hotel, a gorgeous bed and breakfast on the outskirts of Port Arthur. Maurice shares a dream with Nitram, and it's crushed after another couple, the Martins, purchase it for them. Because of this, Maurice falls into a deep depression and ends up drowning himself. Maurice is an interesting character because he is portrayed as emasculated.
This is a completely different thing for me, and I've had to really learn to rein it in. It's much different being reactive in a scene and sitting back quietly and letting stuff kind of affect you, rather than driving the scene forward.
He drowns in his depression quietly. He lays about on the couch, and Nitram beats him to get back up. Nitram's understanding of masculinity is that when you are sad, you must express it through anger to cleanse yourself of it. Maurice is the most sensitive person in the film. He cries like a man, but Nitram sees his suicide as an act of cowardice, when in reality it was just a terrible lapse in judgment. In the film, Nitram receives no money from Maurice's estate, but he still has millions of Helen's dollars. An interesting adaptational choice here is how the film chooses not to show us Bryant's relationship with the manager of his estate. In real life, his parents put an independent trustee in charge of Martin's estate. This was done to make sure the money lasted him a lifetime. Martin couldn't hold down a job after all, so it was seen as a godsend by his parents. In early 1996, the trustee stopped Bryant from travelling the world willy-nilly. He travelled to America, Europe, Asia, and all across Australia, often being gone for weeks and weeks at a time. Sometimes he explored other countries, sometimes he left shortly after arrival. Martin felt entitled to his money, and this decision to curtail his reckless spending contributed towards his choice to commit the massacre. In portraying Nitram as entirely in control of his own money, however, it makes him come across as even more unhinged and out of control. In an attempt to cope with his grief, Nitram tries to buy the Seascape Hotel from the Martins, showing up one morning with a bag full of cash. When they refuse him, he feels as if he's been denied something that he's owed. His father once promised him that they would run Seascape together, and now his dad is dead and he has nothing left. This entitlement, in a sense, radicalizes him. Aggrieved entitlement is a term introduced by sociologist Michael Kimmel. This is a situation unique to young white men amidst postmodern capitalism. Men grow up believing that they will all be rock stars with hot girlfriends when they're older. And as they actually got older, they realized that promise was hollow, so they feel resentment towards that society. It's Fight Club viewed from a teenage mindset. Nitram feels entitled to Seascape, and he associates the death of his father with the couple who brought Seascape. Aggrieved entitlement may also lead some men to become political extremists if they believe that the promises of postmodern capitalism should have been kept. This often becomes a possessive misogyny, and the film doesn't really bother with adapting Bryant's penchant for underage girls. It's a very complicated issue, and I'm the last person to ever want to defend that creep, but Bryant wasn't attracted to girls 15 years his junior because of their bodies. Instead, Bryant felt a closer kinship with their mental age. He liked being around kids and teenagers because he found them easier to talk to. This is because cognitively they were closer together than Nitram was with his own peers. Women his age knew that he was trouble. He wasn't self-aware enough to groom these girls exactly, but he did surround himself with younger people to fulfill his own needs. There were moments in Bryant's life where he looked after the neighbors' kids, and said kids were no longer allowed to play with him after he showed them pornography and violent movies. Further, several of his previous girlfriends said they'd put up with him because he was rich. This is not shallow behaviour. Look at it from their perspective. Martin was weird, but he had money, lived alone, and everyone else their age lived with their parents. And nothing is more awkward than trying to be intimate while your parents are home. Being with Martin gave these girls a level of autonomy that was hard to find in that period in their lives. No one stayed with him for very long, and this fueled his resentment towards women. He became immensely suicidal in 1996 after a particular breakup. He drowned his sorrows in sweet liqueurs. He felt entitled to their affection, and when they inevitably turned him down, he would continue to harass and bother them. That's not something I just read in a book. I have several friends whose mothers and aunts were stalked by him. Bryant would show up at their work every day or every week and ask the same few questions. Want to go on a date? Come back to my place. When do you get off? To which they would usually reply, no thanks, go away. The film consolidates all of this behaviour into two scenes. The first is when a grief-stricken Nitram buys a plane ticket and offers to buy the clerk one. It's played for laughs. And secondly, they attempt to make a statement about Nitram's misogyny in the film's final scene. Nitram is in the Broad Arrow Cafe eating, just moments before killing dozens of people. And what does he look at? The young ladies outside. The clerk who just served him. This old woman. We get to see it from his perspective. We are invited to think like him. In his own twisted logic, he's going to prove that, unlike his dad, he is not a coward. And he's going to prove that by killing the most vulnerable people in the room. To the misogynist, women are possessions to be won, acquired, and then displayed. And what else could be a bigger display of masculinity, of domination, than destroying what other men possess? So he does. I understand this consolidation issue, the time thing. I really wish this film explored this aspect more, because my biggest problem with Nitram is that the statement is underdeveloped. Instead of displaying how toxic masculinity contributes towards mass shootings, the film's use of gays indicates that Nitram is merely cowardly for killing women. This is the wrong thing to take from the film. It's missing the forest for the trees. The film, in trying to criticize misogyny, accidentally participates in it. In assuming that women are helpless and killing them is easier than men, it plays upon outdated stereotypes, and then it reinforces that stereotype for shock value. And while that shock value has a political purpose, and Martin Bryant was a coward at heart, he wasn't a coward because he targeted women and children. Misogyny and aggrieved entitlement are pivotal to understanding why Port Arthur happened. Not to mention racism, anti-Semitism, and white supremacy, all of which the film barely acknowledges. In saying all of that, you could frame it as a net positive. The fact that the film doesn't pass the Bechdel test is the very point of it all. Every character is always talking about Nitram, and that reflects his own sense of narcissism, right? But I do think overall that this is a really big misstep. For as confident and empathetic as it is, the film stumbles off stage after performing a brilliant dance. The ending is shocking, and relatively tastefully executed, but it misses the chance to leave an even bigger lasting impact. As it is in the film, Nitram holds on to the promise of his father that they will run Seascape together, as if it will cure him of all of his guilt and grief. In the context of the narrative, the 1-2 punch of Helen and Maurice's deaths put a strain on Nitram. Strain theory is a criminological term that refers to the external pressure a person feels. So for instance, dire financial straits may push someone to seek relief outside of the law. If someone's low on money, they may feel compelled to rob a store to relieve that strain. Similarly, Nitram is under emotional strain, and to satisfy himself, he buys himself some guns. Chapter 5. Jumping the Gun. Nitram is a deeply political film. It was conceived entirely in a post-Parkland world, where victims are mocked by gun lobbyists for daring to challenge gun laws. So the film's focus is less on misogyny and more on the inevitabilities of gun violence. The gun store scene is the thesis statement for the entire film. It's the scene that Kurzel, Davis, and most everyone involved cite as the moment they decided to join the project. A young man who has so many problems and way too much money easily walks into a gun store without a license and proceeds to buy thousands of dollars worth of guns.
The total of 8,000.
Okay.
Yep, okay. So, have you got your gun licence?
No.
You don't have one at all?
I don't have one.
You don't have one?
No. We don't need to register.
No. If you had wanted a handgun, there's no way I could have sold you a handgun, all right?
All of the guns, ammo, bags, everything he bought were technically illegal. And yet he meets no resistance in doing so. The laws did not stop him from getting them. This suggests that the point of these laws were not originally intended to stop people like Bryant, but to empower them against other minorities. Tasmania in particular has a history of ruthless violence against Aboriginal people, almost effectively eliminating the entire population in the name of civilization. The archaic gun laws in the film reflect this. It's a post-colonial critique that would have landed much stronger if the film actually displayed Bryant's racism in any salient way. Just before the massacre in real life, Bryant was observed by patrons complaining about Japanese tourists, and he claimed to hate Sally Martin because he thought that she was Jewish. The first 2 people he killed in the cafe were also Malaysian. There is a trend where filmmakers, representing an older time, ignore the blatant racism and homophobia to not upset the modern sensibility of audiences. Think of the sanitized 80s of Stranger Things in the modern It adaptation. And I'm surprised that Kurzel ignored this because he so effectively portrayed this in his Snowtown film.
Anyone touch my kids?
Yeah.
I'm gonna go honey over a fucking bull's ant's nest.
Yeah. And rightly so, mate.
You know, let
Rightly
them eat,
so.
or a hungry rat in a tube and let them eat their fucking dick off.
Right.
You know, full on. These fucking dirty bastards. In a nutshell.
Gay rights were as much of a topic of conversation as gun laws were in 1996. Nonetheless, the scene in the store plays out exactly as it did in real life. And after the massacre, Mr. Hill, the clerk who served Bryant, had his store shut down for not abiding by licensing laws. The scene is supposed to evoke shock and disgust in you, a sense that this is just so morally wrong, so far beyond the bounds of morality that it evokes an emotion. All guns are bad if someone can get one like this. On this channel, I have discussed the outcomes of Port Arthur, the establishment of the National Firearms Agreement, and the integrity of Australians' gun laws, so I don't want to repeat myself here. Feel free to check out my old videos. Sorry for the sound quality, but I do want to explore one element of the film that I have never seen anyone else talk about. There is an imagined character in the film. His name is Jamie.
Shit, thanks, mate.
No problem.
Right in your face, man.
I heard it.
Did ya?
Yeah. Surfing.
I'm Jamie. Cheers.
I know.
The film uses this character as synecdoche for all of the other men in Bryant's life that he must have found aspirational. As an individual, though, he represents Nitram's platonic ideal of masculinity. He dates, surfs, and he is conventionally attractive. Nitram wants to emulate Jamie's swagger throughout the film by growing his hair long and driving with a surfboard on his roof. This is his own way of signaling to others that he is as interesting as Jamie. He adopts Jamie's verbs without understanding his syntax, if that makes any sense. He sees Jamie as aspirational, but he isn't entirely sure why. So he just emulates his aesthetic to make himself as good as Jamie in his own mind's eye. This neurodivergent emulation is pretty common for autistic, and I have plenty of horror stories of my childhood like it. My teeth are so yellow because when I was a boy, I was friends with a kid who didn't brush his teeth, and I wanted to be as cool as him, so I stopped brushing them. And for my entire adult life, my teeth have been darker than anyone else I knew personally, because emulating his aesthetic was fun and it made me feel cool, when in reality it just made me into a weird little prick with bad breath. The final scene with Jamie shows Nitram offering him a bag full of guns.
This is for you. It's for you. This is honor. It's yours. I got it for you.
As if he were tantalizing him, as if this would be as normal as a packet of Tim Tams. Nitram is so infatuated by Jamie that he takes up a lot of mental space within his psyche, whereas Nitram is barely a character in Jamie's life. He's just a guy who hangs out on the beach sometimes. This discrepancy also represents Nitram's narcissism. He is unable to empathize with others because he's caught up in his own sense of tragedy. He wants Jamie to feel as sorry for him as he feels for himself. We feel some empathy for Nitram, we feel bad for his tragic inability to make friends or to have fulfilling relationships, but we never feel sympathy for him. Because ultimately he's a bad person who is completely disinterested in learning and changing himself for the better. He's more interested in emulating other people than being his own authentic person. When Nitram wants to make friends, he wants them to think like him. So he offers Jamie a bag full of illegal guns. Nitram projects his own inadequate masculinity onto Jamie, and when he backs away from him in a stunned and afraid manner, his ideal is shattered. But as these thoughts ruminate in his mind, he figures out a way to supersede Jamie as the masculine ideal. When Martin Bryant was at siege in Seascape Hotel, he tried to convince the police negotiators that his name was Jamie.
Jamie.
Yes, hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Jamie. Yourself?
Well, I'm well up till now.
In executing the massacre, Nitram is living up to his own masculine ideal. It's small details like this in the script which really elevate the film for me. And I shivered all over in my body when I figured that out when I saw it the first time. As discussed in the last chapter, the massacre happens off screen, with the notable exceptions of the Martins. For what it's worth, and as much as I criticized it, the ending is still great. I'm so glad that it doesn't have this sudden explosion of violence. I'm so glad that it didn't go full Wolf Creek 2. It would have ruined the movie. I think the editing and the sequence of shots turns it into so much more of a harrowing scene if they just shot it normally. It leaves many things open to interpretation because our imaginations are always going to provide us with more disturbing imagery than the filmmakers could ever come up with. It's more tasteful than what Crimes That Shook Australia did, or what that fucking Wasp movie is. The scene at Seascape is not glorious. Nitram knocks on the door and shoots the Martins with an AR-15. The camera doesn't cut, so you see how quickly death comes. The scene is stripped down from real life. Bryant entered the Seascape Hotel and tortured David and Sally Martin for 2 hours with a knife. It is suggested in the film that Nitram mostly wanted revenge against the Martins for killing his dad, a delusion caused by his low intelligence. There is a disturbing logic being played out here. If Nitram killed 2 people, he would go to prison for the rest of his life, so why not go out in the blaze of glory? Like the Dunblane shooter, this is an act of suicide, a nihilistic plea to be remembered as anything other than himself. The Martins are used to explain why the massacre happened to a wider audience. In real life, the 28th of April was David Martin's birthday, but it doesn't explain everything. It's hard to comprehend the logic of nihilistic violence because it's just that. We cannot understand why the massacre happened because Bryant doesn't know why he did it. He lacks the intelligence to be self-aware of his own flaws. A common motif in the film that I've not mentioned up until this point is the use of camcorders. Nitram records himself doing many different things. He is intelligent enough to notice that people are put off by him, but not enough to know why, so he films himself to try and understand what they see.
And sometimes I watch myself. But I don't know who it is that I'm looking at. Like, I can't get to him. If I could just change him so that he was like everyone else, but I don't know how. So instead, I'm here, stuck here, like this. eating this shit, talking to you all because I'm not a coward like him.
It's sad, and in a better world he would have access to another mentor, but because two of the only adults in his life that he liked died, he becomes untethered by the reality of love and compassion. His mental illness is load the gun, his grief cocks the barrel, and his entitlement pulls the trigger. Seconds before committing the massacre, Nitram pulls out a camcorder and presses record. This is made up. I haven't seen any information that something like this happened in real life, so it has to have artistic meaning. He's not naive enough to think that he will ever watch back this footage. Instead, this is an act of suicide, and in real life he expected to be killed at the historic site of Port Arthur by police officers or just someone with a gun. Instead, through this video he wants the world to see that Martin Bryant was an evil, powerful man who killed people at Port Arthur. Not measly little Nitram, the primary school insult. Nitram allows us to touch the void. Despite being Kurzel's least explicit film, it's his darkest. It's a slow descent into hell. It's not an enjoyable watch, but it is deeply rewarding. Caleb doesn't say out loud, "I wish I could be masculine like you, and that's why I'm emulating you, Jamie." It's all shown through his acting and the choice direction. They earned that Best Actor at Cannes tenfold. It's very important to distinguish the determinism of the story with the determinism of history, because in the real world, Port Arthur did not have to happen. If Bryant had received adequate help with his mental ill health, and Tasmania did not have such lax gun laws, it is very likely that it never would have happened. Bryant could have gone on to have lived a perfectly satisfactory life. The determinism of the story, the national perspective if you will, is a strong framing device. Because of the lack of gun control at the time, Nitram is a hurricane. It makes a political statement, but he wasn't some force of nature. Bryant was your weird neighbour, your annoying classmate. He was more normal than you would like to admit. The film asks you to empathise with Bryant because he is a common type of man, and to put him into the box of evil is an attempt to contain those nasty thoughts that exist within the mind, ones that are better left unsaid, and leave you feeling guilty and ashamed for thinking them. Bryant, empowered by his status of white working-class cis-able-bodied man, planned the massacre because he could. He was a toxic cocktail of narcissism and entitlement, and that's what made him so dangerous. It was not that he was too stupid to control himself, it was that he consciously disregarded his inhibitions so that he could satisfy his twisted sense of vengeance. Australian society had to change after Port Arthur, because no one wanted to accept that this is what masculinity could accomplish. 35 men, women, and children dead for no discernible reason. Conclusion, Carleen. The saddest part of Nitram is how it portrays Carleen Bryant, a mother who is ultimately frustrated by her son, a person that she finds difficult to love.
And this sort of, stoicism with this character of Carleen and, her kind of grace under fire and the sort of dignity that this sort of woman holds, and how you can sort of, despite her kind of coldness, sort of feel a mother there sort of desperately trying to kind of love a child that's almost unlovable.
It hurts because it's so honest. She underestimates her son's intelligence because everyone else does, and she doesn't think that he can recognize her resentment of him. Being a neurodivergent child to a neurotypical parent is tricky because the both of them lack a psychic unity. And although the two might love each other in abstract ways, they can never truly understand one another.
And yeah, there is a degree of protection for her son because she's lived with him for 20 odd years. And this woman must be misunderstanding him. And it has a potential for damage, either to him or maybe even to her.
It requires vulnerability and an openness to change to actually communicate your needs. And this pair, left after everyone else has died, are ultimately unable to do that. The scenes that feature Carleen and Nitram are so painfully awkward and sad. Through everything that Nitram goes through, Carleen grieves for her late husband and for her son's sudden independence. He is so caught up in his own pain, and he is so blinded by his own narcissism, that he fails to see Carleen's pain for what it is. Perhaps the most heartbreaking scene in the film is Maurice's funeral. Nitram arrives slightly late, dressed in Helen's gaudy clothing, ruffles and frills. Carleen sees this as an insult. Nitram doesn't understand what he's done wrong. Helen told him that this outfit was fine to wear, and Carleen forbids him from entering the funeral. "I have to say goodbye to my dad," he murmurs. She tells him to leave through tears. He leaves his hat on his father's casket, with a bird feather stuck into the binder. The old Pella probably would have had a laugh. The scene is cruel, but morally grey. It would be simple, so simple to call Carleen a cold-hearted bitch here. But that would be wrong. Carleen has pushed aside her emotion for her entire life, moulding it around Nitram's needs and desires. And she puts her foot down, because she's in extreme emotional distress. She has to allow herself to grieve for her husband right. She is seen as cold in the film, but those feelings are not unreasonable, because her son did ruin her life. I made an entire video about her life after Port Arthur. I don't want to repeat myself too much, but she caught the brunt of her son's actions in Port Arthur's wake. It was never fair on her. She tried her best, and in real life, Carleen loved her boy dearly. I have some final thoughts I want to express, because I'm not very likely to talk about Port Arthur again on this channel unless something very dramatic happens. I have my own private sources, people who I've talked to, who have actually worked with Martin Bryant in prison. I'm not allowed to say their names because NDAs and they might lose their jobs. But this is a small channel and it doesn't matter if I relay some small things here. Conspiracy theorists argue that Bryant was set up and / or assisted in doing Port Arthur, and I spent 11 hours detailing why all of that is untrue. In real life, Bryant brags about his murders in prison. In recent years, his notoriety has begun to diminish. Younger prisoners come in and they don't know who he is. He feels upset about that. He was also very upset when, in 2011, a fascist in Oslo, Norway, killed over 100 people, essentially superseding his record for the most people killed by a lone gunman in a mass shooting. Likewise with the Las Vegas shooting. These days he spends most of his time switching between the maximum security prison and the mental health ward at Risdon. He has not changed or developed very much. I don't have anything to report as to whether he knows about the film or not, but he would likely be very happy that a film was released about him, in essence reinvigorating his image as an evil man who children fear. This was a major point of contention in the media. Does the film deserve to exist? Because if it does, it only adds to his notoriety. There was a short film even made about this. Kurzel backwards, I can't remember how to pronounce it. And my answer is yes, it has every right to exist. I love art. And I love art that dares to challenge and interrogate uncomfortable topics.
I think cinema can make people feel braver about talking about things that we fear having an opinion on.
But freedom of expression does not mean freedom of criticism. I've tried my best to be balanced on this film. As much as I like it, I have problems with it. The film is a tremendous character portrait, and in recognizing Nitram's worst traits within ourselves, we can try and fix our own problems. Bryant is ultimately an insignificant man who will live in prison until he dies, and his death will not matter. It will not make the world better. It will be the same as your death and mine. The film changed his name to take away some of his power, to refer to him as a childhood insult, and then lay bare what a dysfunctional person he was. It reminds me a little bit of a video that went viral a couple of years ago. Indulge me for a second. If you're interested in true crime online, then you likely know JCS Criminal Psychology, who popularized the interrogation footage commentary subgenre. They released a video on the Parkland shooter, and what I took away from that video all those years ago is that these young men want to be remembered as the kind of people who make children wet their beds in fright. But by bluntly displaying who they are on screen, by laying bare how they attempt to manipulate others, it forces the audience to overlook the vulgarity of their crimes, and you just cringe at them. So let these spree shooters be remembered for who they really were, not who they want to be remembered as. Interrogate the toxic masculinity that underlies their actions, and be better than them. The antidote to inspiring copycats is to lay them bare for being embarrassing losers. After Parkland, so many kids stood up for their rights. And you should remember them more than Cruz or Bryant. Don't repeat Nitram's name, but remember the victims and their suffering. I tried my best to do that with my series. I saw the Nitram opening night in Tasmania. The film started with awkward laughter and ended with suffocating silence. Despite knowing everything there is to know about the real-life Nitram, I was still so shocked by it. There is a certain scene early on when Nitram tries to swindle Helen into buying him a gun. Initially she says no, but then he collects himself and he comes up with a simple plan. It really made me sit up and pay attention because we often see Bryant as a passive agent in media, as a force of nature. Remember the hurricane. Nitram is an active character who propels his story forward. To say anything else is misogynistic, white-privileged nonsense. The film recognizes his agency, his cognitive ability to have wants and needs. And seeing him as an active agent made me realize how intelligently produced the film was. I've long advocated for viewing Bryant as a man, not a monster. It's an unpopular position in Tasmania, because we call him a monster for what he did, because then we don't have to recognize him within ourselves. The portrayal of Nitram reminds me a lot of my brother. And I love my brother with all my heart. My dad was afraid of seeing the movie for that very reason. And that scared me because it was so emotionally honest and real. I feel as if Kurzel expressed something true to life. And that made the ending even more shocking, even though I knew it was coming. Without a single shot going off in that cafe, I felt the entire weight of Port Arthur in my body. Without a single body hitting the floor, I felt the impact of Australian gun control. And without saying a word, I left the theatre and I couldn't speak for 15 minutes. My mind was numb, and that was an experience I'll never forget.
Right, so you just watched through Nitram, and we've been out for about 10 minutes. What are your initial thoughts after seeing it? How would you feel as a piece of media it portrayed the incident and it portrayed Blondie?
I don't know what to say. It's been a long time since a movie left me that speechless. Justin Kurzel, you're a piece of shit.
Fuck you, Justin Kurzel, you're a piece of shit. It's my second favourite film of 2021. I tried to temper my expectations and it met them. Thank you for watching.
I give these Nitram charcoal pencils a 9 out of 10. Thank you very much for watching my content. Buy Nitram stuff!